So hey, welcome everybody. I'm James Waters. I'm the CTO for a group at VMware called Tanzu, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Scott Rosenberg and Deckel Tankel. Scott, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Rosenberg. I'm the practice leader for cloud technologies and automation at TeraSky.
Yeah, and Scott, you and I had the pleasure to connect in New York City one day, and I was just blown away by the depth of understanding you had developed on TAP and the kind of conversation that ensued. So it's really great to have you on the team, extended team, and it's super excited about sharing some of your observations and learnings with everyone today. And Deckel, do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Deckel. Been working on the Devx side of stuff for a while with James, brother from another mother, I guess. And very excited about what we're doing with the Tanzu Application Platform and this whole Devx world. So great to be here. Thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, and maybe just before we have a quick chat about this, I'll share a couple of slides to frame the problem that we're trying to solve with TAP. It just went generally available this week. We're super excited about it. And I'll share, in brief, a little bit of how we're kicking off some of the conversations about it. I think at a high level, the interesting moment we find ourselves in as we head into 2022 now is that a lot of people have been doing some Kubernetes. But the pattern that I see in the market is that it hasn't always achieved enterprise scale. So it might be in the first few teams that might be doing DevSecOps on a small scale, but it hasn't really achieved total enterprise scale yet. And that's one of the challenges we really want to solve with TAP and why it works on any Kubernetes. We really believe in meeting clients where they are in terms of their Kubernetes journey and then helping advance that. The two core observations then are that, kind of Kubernetes, it's unbelievably extensible and customizable and flexible, which is why I think it's got such a valuable place as the integration layer for DevSecOps in the cloud market. But at the same time, it doesn't come with a turnkey security or developer experience. Like those are sort of choose your own adventure or bring your own or build your own. And so a lot of what we're doing with TAP is really to try to unlock developer productivity with something that's really operable and securable for enterprises at scale. And the reception's been really great so far. And we're going to talk about, some of the customizations that can be done. And that's why we're super excited by partners like TeraSky and Scott, here to discuss that. At the start of it, we're really, maybe we can just do one more slide after this and kick off the conversation. We've been discussing, this new technology, called Backstage, which we've used inside of TAP to host some of these application templates. And one of the observations that we've had in the market is that if you think that just having Git and Kubernetes is enough to really do DevSecOps in a repeatable, secure way, like you might be at the start of your journey. And we found that in microservices, especially at scale, having repeatable patterns and patterns that don't require a meeting, Deckel calls this the architectural committee as a service. Having these template engines are really, really important. We can talk about customizing those. And the other thing is that the pipelines themselves, they could probably use a little bit a higher degree of templatization and organizational adaptability and persona interfaces. And so we've helped shift the model with TAP of these enterprise path to production to be more focused on a persona. So we're able to present a very concise workload YAML for just a developer to come in and say, here is my GitHub URL, here's the version of my application, here are the services I need to make a claim and bind to. The path to production can be articulated at a high level, and then the infrastructure configuration is also articulated in its own way. And this allows each persona in the organization to kind of do their job. And this is sort of a total, big hit for the folks that have taken a look at this. And a lot of the challenge here is then how do you customize this to your enterprise? And we're going to talk about that today. In any case, just at a high level, we're bringing this next generation pattern, templatized, secure, and developer-friendly path to production to any Kubernetes. We have a great time demoing this on EKS as an example. When people think, oh, hey, it's from VMware, it must run on vSphere. We start on an EKS demo. also runs on, Azure, container service. It runs on OpenShift. It runs on, of course, our own TKG. So this is what we're up to with TAP at a high level, and there's a lot of value we can focus on here today. But I thought we might get into a little bit of the conversation of like, why does this matter, and what are we seeing, in the feedback in the market, and what the potential are. So Scott, maybe I'll put you on the hot seat and say, like, what are the things that you find promising about this approach to a next generation kind of developer security and operating experience on Kubernetes?
Yeah, thanks, James. I really think that, what's so special about TAP is its flexibility. I think that, when we started down the path of platform as a service years ago, it was really kind of this magic solution that you gave it code, it came out with a URL at the end, but there was really no way to customize anything in the middle. And it kind of went down the approach of this one-size-fits-all type of approach. And there was a backlash to that, which grew Kubernetes. And Kubernetes, on the other hand, is very open and is something that you really don't want to give your developers straight out full access to the API service there because it's so huge. And I think that what's great about TAP is that it comes with all these amazing defaults that it can be as simple as give me your code, I'll give you a URL. But it can also be as customizable as you would like it to be. And that's really where the strength comes in here. You can get that out of the box, easy install, easy to use system for one size fits all, but you could also adapt it to your environment as much as you find necessary.
I think that's a really great articulation. And in some ways, when I was talking to some of the largest PaaS clients that we had for this sort of existing and venerable Cloud Foundry platform, I said, in the past, your security scan all had to happen before that PaaS experience kicked off. And I said, and that sort of really limited the true developer experience, because if you were hiding that final simple PaaS interface, but in front of it were all these complicated pipeline steps and Jenkins builds and security steps, the developer didn't often get the true simple path to production. And what you're saying is dead on here, which is we're actually taking that whole get triggered commit experience and simplicity the whole way to the beginning of the path to production now. But I think that's also why it's going to be so incredibly important to have partners such as TeraSky that can help then fit this to an organization as they exist today.
Yeah, I think like just the biggest examples of that really are, when we look at TAP itself, where it comes with like Tecton for CI tasks, and it comes with Gripe for image scanning and source code scanning, which is great. But a lot of times when we come into an organization, they may have a robust CI unit testing system built off of Jenkins or whatever it is that they want to be using, or they may be using other products for security scanning. And the great thing is that we can plug those in, right? We offer a solution as part of TAP, but anyone that has that special security tool that's what their security platform team allows, great, we can integrate there as well and give you the exact same experience that you get with the out-of-the-box solutions with custom ones as well.
Yeah, and my observation is I don't think people have seen that much in the market before. I think they've always felt like there was this hard choice between kind of high performance, easy to use, and customization. And I think this is the first solution that is trying to be an integration and a wrapper layer across what they already have going, and we can say yes to extensibility. So Deckel, I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, I think what I see is that we are talking about productivity with control for years, right? And it always felt to customers like this is a pipe dream. It's just a marketing slogan that can never happen. Either my developers are productive, but are generating tons of junk code that will never hit prod, or I have to close everything and make them everything kind of locked in. And there is no middle ground. And I think what we've seen over the past year or so as we progressed with presenting the TAP to customers is really that abstraction and the right tools to the right persona. The developers get the workload, YAML, get services, go. They're happy. the app operators can define the workflow of the app, like what happens before what, and get the code, scan it, build the image, scan it, and so on. But the platform operators can take those out of the box default, as you mentioned, Scott, and essentially put a different pipeline instead of Tecton or a different scanner instead of Greg, but it's their decision to do it, and it's a different. The developers don't care about it, maybe even the app operator doesn't care about it. And the way that's kind of one area that I see that the abstraction is very, very is resonating very well. But that's not enough, because you can argue in some cases that we've tried this before with like Bosch and Cloud Foundry, right? And it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is because there was no ecosystem, and we didn't have hundreds of partners coming in and building Bosch tiles. And so the customer was kind of left hanging. Either I do it myself and I need to learn Bosch, or I don't really have a pluggability. But I think now it's a very different story. And Scott, I love your input on that, because we are making this bet on CRDs, on Kubernetes resource definitions, which seems to be a much more acceptable plugin for the ecosystem to come in and provide these tools around that and help the customers to make that pluggability a reality.
Yeah, I think Kelsey Haytower put it the best way, that Kubernetes is a great platform for platforms. It's a good starting point, but isn't the end goal. And Kubernetes has been accepted by the community basically as that general API surface. And then TAP is the way to really bring those APIs that basically the industry has kind of agreed upon, that's the central API system is Kubernetes, with all these custom resource definitions. And you're looking at all the cloud providers today, all of their resources are also custom resources in Kubernetes that you can deploy, right? It's amazing that you can do anything, and all of that comes together with the choreography of TAP to give you that single amazing user experience.
But at the same time, that power is like one quote from large airlines we are working with. It's like that pluggability is like putting developers in the pilot seat in front of 500 knobs they know nothing about. They think they do because there's such a hype, then they can crash the plane. So it's that power without the right abstraction. That's really dangerous to organize, especially when you start going to public clouds first, like EKS first, and then you end up with these hundreds of different permutations and you don't know what's in the containers. So I think that's what customers see as the greatest value of TAP, that separation of concerns and the right abstraction to the right persona.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think also the really amazing thing here also is that, from that workload YAML, from that GitHub URL, it's an amazing part of TAP. But I think what we're seeing, at least from, the customers that we're discussing this with, is that actually App Accelerator is really one of the most amazing parts of the tool itself, because even getting to that GitHub URL of where my source code is located is not an easy thing within organizations. How do you build out that repository from the beginning? How do you build your code in a productive and correct manner according to your company's standards? And I think App Accelerator is really an amazing tool that's allowing us to, offer a self-service catalog to our customers that will really be tailor fit to exactly how they want something to look, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think maybe the truth behind all of that is that, we do leverage Backstage and App Accelerators, and there's a lot more technology in there. But when I'm talking to folks, I tell a bit of the Spotify story, which is that Spotify found themselves, developing on GKE, which is a reputable Kubernetes service. And they're a relatively high-end employer of engineers in Europe. But even then, for them to achieve continuous delivery scale and truly developer productivity, they had to build out a whole layer on top of it, starting with the application templating and those paths to production. Very TAP-like, really, what they did. And they were actually, the first use case was Spring Boot, which is, of course, a linchpin of Tanzu technology. The Spring framework is included. And so I think that's right on, Scott. And, the phrase I use is that if you wait until the app is already written, it might be a little bit late to do the DevSecOps transformation. It's sort of like, And we can really start at the project initiation and get a lot of that bootstrapping, make it both easier and more repeatable at once.
It's no longer just about the source and the config. You see organization with relying on internal APIs between microservices with zero standards. So not even the structure of the API callback, like what labels are you using, what filters, nothing is standardized. And the only thing they have is a 40-page white paper or wiki page that they expect developers to go read before they build the API. So that never works because the developers are going to do what comes easiest. So the power of the accelerators is architectural committee as a service, or whatever you want to call it. It gives you those standards without the pain of trying to read and understand all these documents, and it's just there. Like you cannot start differently. And if you really want to take it to the next level, you can extend those accelerators to a supply chain. That's kind of what I'm showing in the demo. It's not just the developers. The app operators are playing the same role. They are creating curated supply chains for path to prod for different types of workload. If it's a backend Spring Boot, if it's a Python data processor, if it's a Go function, each one of them has a curated supply chain. So then the app accelerators are not just code and config, they are code, config, API, and path to prod, all standardized and self-service. So there is a lot of power to that, which is, by the way, not just TAP. You can deploy the same thing to Cloud Foundry or to anywhere you run. Those concepts work regardless of the infrastructure.
So would you advise, like, how would you, if you were going to advise an organization on adopting TAP, Scott, given your experience, like, where do you think they should get started, and what should they customize to their org first? Would you start with the app accelerators?
Right. So when we look down this, I think it really depends on where they are on their journey in microservice, and modernization. In typical, what we're seeing is that the move, especially from some of these legacy organizations, it's very difficult to make the change all at once. Usually what we would suggest in these cases is to choose one or two new applications that they're planning on building right now and get to learn it from the new application. Learn how they want to deal with this. So start from, great, what languages are you going to use? And do you have any standards around this? And have some kind of discovery sessions with them to understand, what type of architectural decisions do they really care about in how their code is laid out, and build a tailored app accelerator for them. And at that point, we would deploy TAP. Usually, I would say you would start with the out-of-the-box supply chain as well. If they had some requirements to use a specific pluggability, we would do that at that point. But I think the first goal is just to get that first app up and running. And even if it's just in the test environment, get something up and running and start iterating over it and have put this in your developers' hands. Most of the changes we make can be completely behind the scenes and our developer doesn't need to know because he's just giving us that workload YAML. So the great thing is we can give it to them, have them start getting used to this in the test environment, and then at the same time, continue with deeper discovery sessions and really build out that custom supply chain, both off of feedback we get from the developers and also based off of operations needs.
I think that's so well said. And one of the things I chat with customers about this is that one of the goals of the architecture, because these personas are articulated as their own CRDs, you should be able to make changes to that supply chain and the developer won't feel it. Where in the past, if it's just a bunch of Jenkins tasks, you're never quite sure how that end-to-end imperative chain might feel different or might break. Whereas I think if we do this right, the ecosystem should be there so that the pluggability should be maintained so that the different personas can change that supply chain over time. But the developer experience in that app pattern as the most important starting point, I think, can remain.
And I think what's really amazing, what actually allows that also, is the fact that, when we look at the tools that, VMware have decided to put into TAP, it's really the industry standard tools today, which is what's so amazing. Integration with Tilt, which I've been using for Kubernetes development for quite a while. VS Code as an integration point for the IDE plugin, using Knative, using Contour. And it's amazing to see that really an organization that maybe, let's say, more already in the modern apps world and already using Kubernetes is familiar with almost all of these tools that are part of TAP. We're just giving it a much better solution that wraps all those together and really binds them together and gives us that glue to create a really, really strong platform out of all of these sets of tools that exist out there, but not going and just creating the wheel, from scratch. We're really harnessing all the strength from the community, and that's what's so amazing.
I mean, you're such an expert in this. It's always fun to hear your takes. And I think that's exactly right, which is this would have been really hard to do in like 2015 because you're building all of this from scratch yourself. Whereas given the explosion of the Kubernetes ecosystem, it's now possible to use the Kubernetes programming model to bring them all together, kind of for the first time, if you will. Like that's sort of the why now for me of TAP.
Yeah.
Deckel, do you want to maybe show us a little bit of what we've got here with App Accelerators?
Absolutely. I love showing things. So let's
do it. So, let's open TAP up.
So first, before we do that, this is EKS. So no vSphere. This is a VMware product, but hey, welcome to EKS. It's just a cluster. Here is all the workloads, all the namespaces of TAP, everything here. And guess what? To run this thing, one command. So you just install it with one command to install, and then you get all these packages that we talked about, some of them built in. So one of the cool things that the reason these type of ecosystem plugin works is underneath the cover, there is an open source project called Cartographer that is essentially an agreed upon orchestration tool for CRD. So in a nutshell, TAP is a collection of CRDs that can run on any kubectl dial tone and brings you out of the box packages for everything you need. And each one of these packages you can customize. If you remember, we talked about Great. You can plug in something different, Flux CD, plug in something different if you want, or Tecton as a pipeline and so on. But it's all orchestrated by the platform. And what it gives you, as an example, on EKS, everything is now running, is let's take a quick look at the Backstage UI. So this is the main portal to TAP, and it has multiple plugins. You can see, for example, if I'm a developer and I want to look at some of the patterns, this is the output of my horrific architectural committee. As a service, each box here was created by your architects, your partners. It's not Tanzu. Tanzu gives you the tools to do that. And the developer experience is so simple. They go, let's say we want to build some backend Spring Boot API service, or we want to build a front end with Node, or an event driven with Kafka. These are just examples from conversations we had just in the last couple of weeks with customers, or a function with Go and so on. So the developer is moving so like order of magnitude less nodes or less knobs, if you will. They just give their app a name. Let's say you want to build some sensors app or something. You can decide as an organization, and we see a lot of people starting doing that you have to have a source repository before you even start coding. And to your point, Scott, like you don't actually know where that repository is. That is injected by the accelerator into your system, so you don't have to go and look.
Just to be clear, this is a value add. If you're a new developer at an enterprise and you've not spent hours reading the wiki of how to go integrate all these things together, you just want to start a project, you can come here and the integrations happen transparently for you, and then you're directed to those systems over time. And I think this is an example of where our partners are so critical in this work of like kind of getting this turnkey set up, day one.
Yeah, and I mean, you just reminded me of something from yesterday, that we were presenting this to a an insurance company, and they were like, one of the comments was, hey, so people we onboard can actually do this in their first day before they finish their onboarding course. Now we have a 3 weeks of wiki page reading before they even allowed to check in code. So I just blew my mind, like, hey, instead of reading hundreds of pages, just go here and do it. And then services, you can start curating your whole services experience, whether it's public cloud or on-prem or on Kubernetes, and just let your developers choose. And then you will see how simple the output is of all of that. And let's call it, give it some names and look at the developer output of this. And this is where it gets really fun. By the way, you can also standardize APIs and do a bunch of fun stuff here. But I think this is where people are really kind of getting their aha moment. Right? This is what a developer sees. So compare this is to 500 lines of YAML files. So let's talk about what you don't see here. Well, first of all, you get repo, services, go. No service meshes, no image repositories, no config maps, no go on and on and on. What you need to know about Kubernetes is basically just what you need to build your app, and you can focus your time on doing that repo. And that's awesome, but at the same time, if we stopped here, then we would end up in the same place that Cloud Foundry was, that everything else is a black box. But that's the beauty of the supply chain. So if we look at
just so we're clear on what we're seeing here, in this editor now, you've got the workload YAML. That is what the developer would be, configuring, and then.
So I'm going to show this in a second. So if we go back to our interface here, the developer is basically doing something like this. So they go into CLI. This also has a UI plugin, IDE plugin into Visual Studio Code. They do something around Tanzu apps, workload, apply or create, and they put the workload YAML file that we just created. Downloads and workload. And they decide what namespace to put it in. And that's pretty much it. Now, the reason this is running is because there are supply chains to support this. So we did one that is called Web Backend. This is another one that is called Web. And each one of them invoked a different supply chain. So that's the relationship. There are two supply chains installed here. One is source to URL. The other one is source to API. We deployed an app that has a web backend, a web type. So it uses this. And we already have an app that we deployed previously that does the web backend. Now, the magic happens as you start deploying these apps. That's where the supply chain actually runs and doing the build, the scanning, and everything in between. So that's the relationship. And if you want, we can quickly also show how you actually create those supply chains beyond what comes out of the box. And makes everything runnable. And at the end of the day, the cool thing about that is if I look at a specific workload, I have a deployment, including versioning, build service runs and create an image. I have a config writer. So TAP has a lot of intrinsic security into it, which means that the pods are, even if the image is built and secured and scanned, the pods are actually not going to be created unless you pass the convention phase, which means that you, maybe in the case of Spring Boot, you do certain modification to your pods and config maps, so you block all kind of threats. And this is done centrally to every deployment, and the pod is not even going to start if the config writer is not successful.
Yeah,
I think at the end you have a live URL you can just go and use.
Yeah, and Scott, I'd like your opinion on this. Like security as a feature of Devx. Sometimes I think the two go well together. Like build service and some of these config automation also helps limit config drift and potential misconfiguration.
I definitely think that, there is no DevOps today anymore. It's all DevSecOps. At least in the companies that are really succeeding in this DevOps world, it really is DevSecOps today. Because in the end, we need security at the earlier stages. Because when we just look at something like Tanzu Build Service, right? One of the key components of TAP here, anyone that was running with Java code in their environments that was using Tanzu Build Service just a few weeks ago actually slept over the weekend when Log4j came out. Those that weren't using build packs or using this type of technology are using standardized approaches that have security built in, that have software build of materials being stored in a metadata store so that we can actually query and see where this vulnerability exists. It was an absolute nightmare to figure out where we were vulnerable. And when you use a platform like this, it becomes almost the click of a button, because with the Insight CLI for our metadata store, or through the software bill of materials that Tanzu Build Service puts on every single one of our container images that can be queried, we just get automatic intrinsic security without the pains that shift left security has been known to do for the last few years, because we've shifted it left, but we've shifted it to automation on the left. The platform deals with that. We don't need to have our developers understand everything around security. The platform can take that away. They don't need to know what the best configuration for a Java option is to be secure when running in a container. Let the platform deal with that for them.
So there is something we've seen just last week when we visited a large telco up north here, that they had a lot of pushback from developers, and they were starting to introduce these concepts of curated containers, because developers were feeling like they're losing control. But when you get something like Log4j, and then developers are literally going all weekend trying to help or find what they've done wrong, instead of their sisters and brothers that are using build packs doing, just like you said, sleeping over the weekend. So maybe we don't need that exact control, and we can take a step back and let the platform do what it does. So it works kind of both ways. It helps also understand that the abstraction has its benefits. It doesn't just take away from, hey, give me a container, I'll do whatever I want, and I know what to do.
And especially when that abstraction is configurable, though, and is customizable like it is in TAP. Because that gets rid of a lot of that pushback from the developers, where they don't know what the convention is in some closed systems. The benefit that Cloud Foundry brought back in the day, being based off of Bosch releases, and you could customize that in TAP here using the Kubernetes APIs, is that it really is customizable. And those conventions, if they want to change them, together with the platform team, they can set what those conventions are. So it's not just this, closed system that there's no way for them to actually affect. They really can affect it. It's just taking it away from the day-to-day tasks from them and centralizing it.
I think that's where, and maybe we can wrap on this one. This has been a great first chat. Is, Scott, your advice is that this does meet the market in terms of that trade-off between just like completely on the rails PaaS services and completely hyper customizable. Every developer should, do everything from Jenkins to Docker files to Kubernetes YAMLs and completely themselves. I think this is sort of the persona integrated, app integrated, flexible model that I think is the future. I think there'll be other ones, but I think this is an exciting first movement in the market.
I think that this is, really a game changer in that, case, that it really is the next gen PaaS. It is the next gen of this platform as a service. And it's really exciting to see. I'm excited to see where the product moves, but even more than that, I'm excited to see how customers customize this, because I think that's really where the strength of this is going to come out. When we see those use cases in the near future from customers that are going to start to share, and we've integrated with this system instead, or we decided to do it this way and we created this supply chain. And that's really what's going to be interesting to see. And I'm so excited to get to, be a part of this world in these days where we have such interesting things going on.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you and TeraSky in that mix. It was fortunate for me to meet you in New York that day and get some of your insights about this. Maybe we'll come on again the next time after we've done a few more integrations of these together, and we can share some learnings from there, and continue to advance the state of the art here in this DevSecOps build out.
Definitely. It was great meeting you, and thank you so much for having me here. And it was great to talk to you and Deco. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on and sharing.